everyone, and I hope all of you are safe and in good health. In the last couple of weeks, we see that textile mills in the south and in the other parts of the country as well, they have started their operations after nearly 40 to 45 days of lockdown. Mills are grappling with multiple issues and staring at a very uncertain future. Textile mill owners and the industry at large are looking for some guidance from business leaders and industry experts on how to kickstart their business, what to expect in the near future, and how to run their business during these difficult times. So, in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking to a lot of people from the industry, trying to get their perspectives on the topic of combating the COVID crisis. Today, we have with us Dr. Jairam Varadaraj, Managing Director of ELGI Equipments Limited, who will share his thoughts and perspectives on the impact of the COVID crisis and what the textile mills need to do to survive this crisis. So we welcome you, sir, for this interaction.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here, and I hope that some of my thoughts have some perceptible value. Thank you. Even during the lockdown, because of our international presence and the criticality of supplies, we got some special permission to work at a very skeletal level, our facilities. But now we are part of the regular policy of opening up, and we have started our operations, yes. The impact of it is we have to wait and see, because, but I can tell you how it's going to get affected. Obviously, there's going to be a steep drop in our revenue. That's a given. How much ever hard you stare at your P&L, your revenue is not going to go up under these circumstances. So that's a given. The plus side of it is in certain industry verticals, for instance, food, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, where they produce essentials. We expect to see some traction in those industries. Whether they're going to be at the same level as before, I doubt it. Other industries would be very muted in our planning. The way we've gone industry by industry, looked at what is the future potential, at least for some time. And the other focus area is aftermarket, because it's also an opportunity for us to engage with customers to see how we can bring their cost of operations down. So when you put it all together, it's nowhere near our earlier run rate. There's going to be a significant reduction in our top line, which is fine. I mean, this is what the reality is. I mean, I wish it was not, but that is the reality. But the plus side for us, compared to probably a company that's focused only on India, is it's not just export, but our global presence. We are now operating in over 100 odd countries. Besides, we also have direct presence in 20 countries, and many of these countries are not locked down like India has. There is continuing economic activity, and as a consequence, even in the month of April, we saw revenue bookings from these countries. Again, nowhere near what the normal rates are, but at this point in time, we'll take everything that we can get, right? So that's really a summary of where we are today. We expect, so if you take a crisis like this, there are two aspects that you need to plan for. What is the bottom point that you're going to hit, right? That is one very important data point, that you need to do it with what I call as realistic pessimism, right? You can't be very optimistic, nor can you be extremely pessimistic. Realistic pessimism, you arrive at what is your bottom point. And the second dimension, which is really the tough one, is what is the recovery curve? Is it going to be a rapid recovery curve or a very shallow recovery? So in our context, we have done all these three. We have done the bottom, estimated the bottom by engaging with all our leaders all over the world. And we have looked at two types of recovery. One is a reasonably quick recovery, which is, we are saying, in 1 year, or a very elongated recovery, which we have planned it as 4 years, right? So we are looking at a scenario between these two extremes. And then we prepare how the business will look like through the profit and loss account. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, that's how it's going to look. And obviously, it's not going to look black. It is extremely red, which is also a reality that you need to accept. You can't keep staring at it and beating your chest or your head, saying, I wish it was different. It is not. So in times like this, balance sheet management becomes even more critical, right? Sure, you will have to manage your costs. You have to look at every possible opportunity to revenue. I'll come back and talk about that. But, if you have to take a long-term view of your business, right? There are some businesses that are almost gone forever. And I don't think textiles is one of them. There is long-term, there is potential for textiles. There has to be. So if you take a long-term view, you need to be very judicious about how much cost you take out, right? You should not cut costs to the point where you've destroyed your long-term strength and stability. So that's a very judicious call that you need to make. So in our context, for instance, we are not taking any cost out of technology, right? So we believe that there is a long-term future, and we are continuing to invest in that area, which we believe is up. And I also want to bring in a social element here, because we are all people with a certain level of privilege. We own businesses, our financial positions are reasonable. But we need to be very careful when we cut costs, that we keep in mind a social responsibility under these contexts, that we don't leave too many people out there who don't have the basics to fend for themselves and their family. And I say this not just for an altruistic kind of objective. If too many people are out there in society who don't have the means to fend themselves, you will have unrest, you will have violence. And we all have a responsibility to contribute to mitigating that. So keeping that in mind, I believe the cost options are going to be limited, right? Yes, they are there. There are a lot of things that you can do. And I would like to share one approach that we are taking for cost management. Typically, when you have an economic downturn, you do cost reviews, optimization. Now, whenever you do that under a very simple kind of an economic crisis, you look at how to reduce the utilization of a cost, right? Like, for instance, travel. You'll say reduce travel, cut down on travel. Now, in this situation, that's going to happen automatically, right? So what you need to do is look at your structure of the cost, right? So keeping the same travel example, do we need to stay in a hotel, right? Now, hotels were substitutes for a certain assurance of a clean room and comfort and safety. Now, there are Airbnbs, there are OYOs, and so many other options that have opened up. This is the time for you to work with that structure of the cost, right? So similarly, every element of cost, it is not the rate of use of the cost, but it's the structure of the cost that you need to look at. And you will find that there are ways that you can preserve the activity of the company, but still shrink the extent to which you pay for it, right? So that's one part of it. All these will give you something, but I believe that it's not going to be enough to move your balance to black. It is still going to be in red, right? Now, under these circumstances, and I don't know how to view the textile industry, under these circumstances, if you see a elongated recovery, right, you will have to manage your balance sheet very well. How well is the company funded, right? Now is the time to dig deeply into capitalizing the company the right way, right? If you're looking at even, some sort of bailout plan, subsidies from the government. If they're going to be debt-based, I think it's very dangerous, right? You need to, yes, I'm not saying you can avoid debt, but I believe that most textile industry generally has a burden of debt, a significant burden of debt. So I think it's time for a lot of the owners and promoters of textile industry look hard at your balance sheet and see what are all the ways by which you can change the structure of your capital that gives you stamina during this transition, right? And I'd like to pause here and say, why did we choose a 4-year period, right? Now, we went and researched all crises that have happened in the world over the last 100 years, right? Now, there have been 8 crises, right? Now, out of the 8 crises, there are only 2 that have a similar characteristic. Now, the characteristic is that every citizen in every country has been affected by it, right? So that characteristic exists only with the Spanish flu and the Great Depression, right? Spanish flu in the 1918-19 and 1928-29, the Great Depression. Now, the Spanish flu data is very limited, but it seems like when you read the material that is out there, the recovery was very quick. There was a steep drop and a quick recovery. Whereas the Great Depression was a very gradual drop and a very gradual recovery. But I don't think in this instance it will be a gradual drop. It will be a steep drop like the Spanish flu. But unlike the Spanish flu, the psyche of the people in this world, in a very highly connected, communicating world, the psyche of the people has been quite badly affected, right? Because people have lost faith in human society, not government. We're not talking about government. Generally in human society, how can something like this come and happen and bring the whole society to a standstill? I mean, there's a shock value to it. So you tend to look at it and say, when do I know everything is okay, right? So there is a psyche part of it. The psyche, if you plug it into your recovery, it's going to take some time. Obviously, one big milestone is a vaccine or an anti-flu, right? That's going to raise the confidence level up to a certain point. But I don't think that's going to completely eliminate the shock, right? Because it has hit them. What happens if it happens again? I mean, what are we doing about it, right? So a lot of questions in people's head. So the recovery will be a little gradual. So if you look at the Great Depression, after the economic intervention by many countries, it took 4 years, right? Now, and the 4 years was assisted because it was the start of World War II, because then there was a lot of industrial activity in preparation for World War II, which also added to the recovery. Now, if you look at the intervention by governments during the Great Depression and compare it to now, it is exponentially higher. I mean, the one country, United States, has brought in over $3 trillion in less than a month, right? So this kind of an injection of a recovery program did not happen during the Great Depression. So to that extent, it may be a little earlier. But it's not just the United States. Every country has to do it. Now, the question is, which other countries have deep pockets to be able to do it? So if you compare the United States and if you look at Europe, Europe is a fraction of what US has done, right? And the rest of the world, and coming to India, I'm not even sure we have the depth, the financial depth to do anything that could be extremely significant. So we need to be very wary of this rather than sit in waiting and say it's going to come, and your entire plan is based on some sort of a program from the government. I think we need to take control and see what is it that we need to do. I personally don't think the government is between a rock and a hard place. On one side, economic activity has been stopped. Now you can say it's government's responsibility, but how can you allow citizens to die? You had to take a call. Now they have realized that we need a balance of both. So they've done that, but the damage for economic activity has already happened, right? Now the government's revenues have been hit very badly. So under these circumstances, where is the money, right? It's not about people have these ideas, oh, you just print the money and release. Printing money and releasing is not that easy. You got to, that printed money has to have some economic value underneath that, right? Otherwise you'll just inflate it, right? So then probably we will need 10,000 rupee notes and 100,000 rupee notes rather than 1,000 rupee notes. So I think it's important that we look inside and get stronger and see how we can manage our balance sheet structures to weather this, right? But don't lose sight of the long-term value of the business, the long-term strength of the business, right? Obviously, well, at least in India, most of it has been virtual. We have used this time to build a much larger customer database. There are people available and they're not running around trying to make sales calls or service calls. And we have regrouped. We have had weekly contact programs, reaching out to customers, reaching out, calling them, talking to them. And so there's a positive, continuous engagement to just keep telling. And as by virtue of that, we've received certain calls for customers whose factories are running, for instance, and they desperately needed some service. So we were able to respond in a matter of hours to get their machines up and running. So this program has literally on a virtual basis, we are continuing to contact our customers. Not only our customers, but also our distributors, our channel partners who are effectively small and medium size and their impacts are more. So we keep talking to them, talk about how to get the program up and running, right? Worldwide, in some markets, we are still making sales calls to the extent that customers are wanting us to make the visits. In the rest of it also is just virtual, right? So this is the way we are engaging with our customers. So, if you really look at a compressor, the compressor's life cycle cost has basically three elements. One is the energy cost. The second is the upfront cost of the compressor. And the third is the maintenance cost. Now, assuming the compressor has already been bought, the upfront cost is already sunk, right? But energy cost and maintenance cost is an area where we can do a lot of work, and we have demonstrated this in maybe over 100 mills through our audit programs. We have saved them tremendous amount of money, both on energy and maintenance. Now is the time for a lot of these mills to look at these kinds of, is it going to change the complexion of the company? No. But these are small drops, multiple small drops of cost saving that need to be put together, right? And certainly we can help them, through these audits to see how can they run their compressed air system more efficiently. First of all, I think our commitment to our aspiration is more solid than ever, right? I don't think this crisis has any deficiency in terms of making us go and relook at that, right? Because this is not something that has affected LG alone. It has affected the whole world. So the whole world has kind of shrunk, right? Now, the question is, have you shrunk a little bit less than the rest of the world, right? And that's really the challenge. When things start opening up, I believe there will be opportunities for us for multiple reasons. One, today we are present in most of the key markets in the world, right? The cost of being in those markets are already baked into our P&L, right? So we are there, and we have already demonstrated growth in these markets, traction with customers in these markets. So we are at a very good point to take it to the next level, right? Across multiple markets. That was there even before, it continues, right? But I believe that, in a situation where cash is very, very tight, and when a customer needs a compressor, earlier for them, a brand name was a substitute for risk, right? So they say buy that brand because it's risk free. It's either a multinational or American, European, whatever. Now I think increasingly customers are going to be very careful about any premium that they pay, right? They're going to look for value, right? And on that count, our products have got the best value in the world, right? They are not. You can get the best life cycle cost on every section of the life cycle cost. On energy consumption, we are one of the best in terms of efficiency. I'm not saying we are a cheap compressor, but we are definitely cost competitive, and our maintenance costs are a fraction of the other manufacturers. So this value proposition, I believe, in a crisis like this, will resonate more for the customers who are looking for, better bang for their buck. The earlier brand-driven decisions, I'm not saying they're going to go away, but there will be a diminishment of that behavior, right? So we will be better placed, even in India, right, as well as outside. So we see this on balance. I wouldn't say this is good for us, this crisis, but I don't think when we come out of it, I think we will have some strength as a company. So first of all, you got to believe in the long-term viability of your business, right? You need to look at this crisis through the lens of the long term and not the short term, right? Because the short term looks very messy, right? So you could get messed up in the head if you keep looking short term, right? So look at the long term. Second, but don't ignore the short term. Look at specific scenarios that how the future is going to get played out, right? And like I said, the bottom point and the recovery curve, these two you need to focus on and get a point of view, right? Like I said, realistic pessimism, right? And three, look at all the costs that you can bring down from a structure point of view rather than rate of use, right? Structurally, how can you change your cost without compromising your long-term commitment to the business? And the fourth piece is go and look at the consequence on your balance sheet and see how you can restructure your finances. And there also, you've got to look at very unconventional ways, right? Not very conventional, right? If, for instance, if you're looking at, if the traditional thing is, I need to own 100% of the business, right? Now, you could do that in a very small crisis. You get debt and use that for your cash flow. But this is a deep crisis, and you need to be willing to let go of those kinds of deeply ingrained beliefs that, I need to hold on to it, because conventional models of thinking are no longer relevant in this context, right? It is a very unconventional situation, and therefore you have to have very unconventional models, right? You've got to step out of your comfort zone, really look at what is really in the long-term best interest of the company, not necessarily your own personal biases and beliefs. There is a heart which says within a year, but the mind says it's longer, right? Because, the whole thing is getting restructured, and a lot of people have been affected by it. If you look at 60 to 70% of any economy's consumption, economy's GDP is consumption, right? Now, when you have 60 to 70% relying on consumption, you don't see consumption being sustained to the earlier levels very, very quickly, right? So we need to go through the sentiments, the psyche of the citizens have to change. And that I don't think is going to change in a hurry. Because by the time the threat of this virus goes itself could be a year, right? Because it's still there, it's still out there, right? So after that, the people are going to, during that period, you can't expect consumption, right? People are going to conserve cash. Then a year after that is when they're going to come out of the woodworks, tentatively see whether is the situation improving, is it getting, so heart is hopefully a year, mind says no longer. India, if you're asking in reference to whether the world is going to look for an alternate source for China, it certainly will, but I don't think it's going to happen in a hurry. If we are expecting that foreign companies will come and invest into India as a sourcing point, I don't see that happening quickly, because for the simple reason, most of the companies are conserving their cash at this point in time. They're not going to make such large strategic investments into another country for sourcing, right? But Indian companies that have been, on the fringes of fringe players, they could have an opportunity where they are able to substitute some of the Chinese sources directly. But that also is a function of when there is a recovery. When my sales has dropped 50% or 60%, I'm not really worried about going to a second vendor, right? Because my volumes of procurement are so low, right? So something will happen, but I don't think it will happen in a hurry. But long term, yes, right? Long term, yes, there are opportunities. And that's why I believe that we all need to look long term rather than too short.